Ibrahim Traoré was Burkina Faso's most recognizable face. His red beret military uniform and piercing gaze made him instantly identifiable of everywhere. But this morning, a different man stared back at him from the palace. Mirror-grown beard, disheveled hair, contact lenses changing his eye color, a fake tattoo on his arm. No one would recognize him now. No one would know he was the country's leader. Only 3 people knew about his transformation, because for the next 6 days he would become someone else entirely, to see firsthand what life was truly like for his people. Are you absolutely certain about this, Mr. President Security Chief? Udiogo asked, his concern evident as he handed Traoré the final elements of his disguise, a worn leather wallet containing a counterfeit ID card and the equivalent of 2 weeks' minimum wage in cash. More certain than ever, Traoré replied, studying his transformed reflection. Gone was the military, bearing the confident posture, the symbols of authority in their place stood amid Dusawato, a 34-year-old unemployed construction worker from a northern province, recently arrived in the capital seeking work. The northern insurgency has claimed over 200 lives in 3 months, True continued, yet our intelligence reports are contradictory. The military claims it's foreign-backed terrorists. Local leaders blame ethnic tensions. Opposition politicians say it's a response to government neglect. He turned to face Euro. I need to know the truth, not filtered through advisors or reports, the real situation on the ground. Colonel Mensah, head of presidential security, and the third person aware of the operation, checked his watch. The vehicle is ready, sir. Remember, for the next 6 days, you will have no special protection. If you're recognized or get into trouble, I know, Traoré interrupted, no extraction, no privileged treatment. I'll be just another citizen of Burkina Faso. He smiled grimly. That's precisely the point. Your cover story is solid, Ouedraogo said, reviewing the details one last time. You're from Tetel, displaced by the insurgency. Your documents show you worked construction in Ugusha for 8 years. You have a cousin in the Ugadu suburbs who's letting you stay while you look for work. The cousin doesn't exist, of course, added Mensah, but the address is an apartment we've secured in Zone 16, one of the poorest districts. Basic accommodations, shared bathroom facilities, intermittent electricity, typical for the area. Traoré nodded. Zone 16 was notorious for its poverty, crime, and lack of government services. Exactly the kind of place official presidential visits never reached, the kind of place where discontent festered and insurgent sympathizers potentially recruited. The emergency protocol, he asked. Only as an absolute last resort, Yura replied, handing him a simple feature phone. One message to this number will bring immediate extraction, but using it ends the mission. I understand. Traoré took a final look at himself in the mirror. At 36, he was young for a head of state, but the added beard and subtle makeup aged him slightly. His normally military straight posture now held a slight stoop, as if weighted down by life's hardships. Even his voice had changed, adopting the regional accent of the northern provinces. 6 days, he said to his reflection. Let's see what my government looks like from the bottom. The transition from presidential palace to Zone 16 was jarring, even though Traoré had intellectually prepared for it. The presidential motorcade had discreetly dropped him several kilometers from his destination, where he caught a crowded public bus. Like any other commuter, the bus was overflowing, forcing passengers to stand pressed against each other. The heat was stifling, the air thick with humidity, and the smell of too many bodies in too small a space. A far cry from the air-conditioned vehicles that normally transported him around the capital. They raised the fare again, complained an elderly woman beside him. Third time this year. How are we supposed to live? Several passengers murmured in agreement. Traoré remained silent, observing. As president, he had approved transportation subsidies just 6 months ago, specifically to keep public transit affordable. Where had that money gone when he finally reached Zone 16? The reality of daily life in Burkina Faso's capital hit him with full force. Open sewers lined unpaved streets. Children played. Amid piles of uncollected garbage, the electricity flickered constantly, before failing completely, plunging entire blocks into darkness. As night fell, his apartment was a single room in a crumbling concrete building, a thin mattress on the floor, a plastic chair, a wobbly table, and a single light bulb dangling from a frayed wire constituted the entirety of its furnishings. The communal bathroom at the end of the hall served 20 residents and hadn't been properly cleaned in what appeared to be years. New here?" asked a voice as Traoré examined the room. A man in his 40s leaned against the doorframe, observing him with mild curiosity. "I'm Kennedy next door," Traoré replied automatically, extending his hand. Before remembering his cover, he quickly made the gesture, more casual, less formal than his usual presidential handshake. "Just arrived from the north, fleeing the fighting." "Connate?" asked Traoré. Nodded. "Many like you these days. Government says they're protecting the northern provinces, but all we see are more refugees." Connate shrugged. "Need any help?" "Finding work. I know some people at the construction sites. They hire day laborers. Pay is but better than nothing. I'd appreciate that." "True," said, genuinely surprised by the offer of assistance from a complete stranger. "Meet me at sunrise." The foreman pick early with that. Connate departed, leaving Traoré to contemplate his first lesson. Despite the harsh conditions, community solidarity persisted, something official reports never captured. Dawn found Traoré waiting outside a construction site with 30 other men, all hoping for a day's work. The massive building rising before them was the new International Business Center, a government-funded project he had personally inaugurated 6 months earlier. "They take about half of us," Connate explained. "Say men, usually friends of the foreman, relatives. Those who pay bribes." Sure enough, when the selection began, Traoré watched as certain men were chosen immediately, while others with obvious construction experience were passed over. When his turn came to step forward, the foreman barely glanced at him. "No experience, right? I can tell from your hands." The foreman looked him up and down. "Still strong though." 10-0 CFA for the day, Traoré knew. The standard rate was 15,000. He started to object, then caught himself. This wasn't a presidential decree. This was real life. "Fine," he said. Instead, "Smart man, some of these fools walk away, then complain they can't feed their families." The foreman handed him a shovel. "Basement level, move the sand piles to the west wall." For the next 12 hours, Traoré dug, lifted, and hauled alongside his fellow laborers. His military training had kept him physically fit, but by midday, his muscles screamed in protest. The protective equipment was minimal. No helmets, no proper boots. None of the safety measures required by laws he had signed. During a brief water break, he asked a fellow worker about its safety equipment. The man laughed bitterly. "That's just for the government inspectors. They come, everything is perfect. They leave, everything goes back to normal. The foreman probably sold our helmets months ago, but that's illegal," Traoré said before he could stop himself. "Sure. And who's going to report it? You, me, then we never work again." The man shook his head. "Besides, the inspectors only come when they want bribes. Everyone knows the system." That night, exhausted and aching, Traoré lay on his thin mattress, documenting everything he'd seen in a small notebook. Corruption wasn't news to him. He'd launched several anti-corruption initiatives during his presidency, but seeing its pervasive reach, how it affected daily life at every level, gave him a new perspective. The construction site was just one government-funded project. How many others were similarly compromised? How much of the national budget was being siphoned away? Before reaching its intended recipients by the third day, Traoré had settled into a routine. Construction worked during the day, conversations in local cafes and bars in the evening. People spoke surprisingly freely, unaware of his true identity. Their candid opinions about his government, both positive and negative, were eye-opening. "Traoré talks big about fighting corruption, but nothing changes for us," said one man over cheap beer. the police still demand bribes. The clinic still has no medicine unless you pay extra. The school still has no books. At least he's trying, argued another. Remember before? At least now some of the roads are fixed. My sister says her village got a new well last year only because her village chief is from the same region as a minister, countered a third. It's still about who you know, not what you need. Traoré absorbed it all, neither defending his administration nor criticizing it. The unfiltered perspectives were precisely what he had. Come for on the fourth day, events took an unexpected turn. A labor dispute erupted at the construction site when workers discovered their wages had been arbitrarily cut by 20%. The foreman claimed budget constraints from higher up, but rumors spread that the project manager had simply decided to increase profits. Workers gathered angry but uncertain what to do. Some advocated walking off the job. Others, desperate for any income, argued for accepting the cut. The atmosphere grew tense. We should go to the labor ministry, Traoré suggested, unable to remain silent. There are laws protecting workers. His comment was met with derisive laughter. Have you tried that before, northern man? Asked an older worker. The ministry officials will make us wait all day, then demand bribes to even file our complaint. By then we've lost a day's wages anyway, and probably our jobs. To what about a union? Traoré pressed. The last men who tried to organize disappeared for a week, Conade said quietly. When they came back, they wouldn't talk about it, but they never mentioned unions again. The implication was clear. Despite labor laws, he had personally strengthened workers, faced intimidation and violence for asserting their rights. Somewhere between presidential decrees and ground-level implementation, the system was failing. That evening, Traoré made a decision. He would document the wage theft and ensure this specific case was addressed once he returned to office, but more importantly, he would find out why his labor reforms weren't being enforced, what was happening in the ministries under his authority. The fifth day brought Traoré to the city's northern district following rumors of insurgent sympathizers gathering at a particular cafe. As he sipped bitter coffee, conversations around him confirmed what he'd begun to suspect. The northern insurgency wasn't simply foreign-backed terrorism, as his military advisors claimed, nor was it purely ethnic conflict. My cousin joined them after police took his land, said one man quietly to his companion. The officials said the land was needed for a government project. Then the official's brother started building a villa there. It's the same everywhere. His friend replied, they take what they want, call us terrorists if we object. The foreigners are there, though, added a third voice. They bring weapons, money. But they didn't start it, they just exploit what was already happening. Traoré listened intently. The narrative emerging was complex but consistent. Government corruption and abuse of power created grievances that foreign interests then exploited. His own officials were effectively manufacturing insurgents. As he prepared to leave, a commotion erupted outside. Police were conducting an identity check, a common tactic in areas suspected of harboring dissident. Traoré felt a moment of panic. His counterfeit ID might not withstand close scrutiny by actual authorities. He tried to remain inconspicuous as officers entered the cafe, but his northern accent attracted attention when he answered a perfunctory question. "You papers?" demanded an officer. Palm extended. Traoré handed over his fake ID, maintaining the slouched posture and deferential manner of Amadu. Sowato, the officer, examined it closely, suspicion evident. "This doesn't look right," he said. "Finally, come with me." Before Traoré could respond, the officer's radio crackled with an urgent message. A disturbance elsewhere required immediate attention. The officer handed back the ID with a warning, "Stay available, we'll check this more thoroughly later." It was a narrow escape, but it highlighted another reality: the arbitrary power of authorities over ordinary citizens without his presidential protection. Traoré was just another suspect, another potential victim of systemic abuse. That night, in his sparse room, he faced a difficult decision. His sixth day mission wasn't complete, but his cover had been compromised if detained and thoroughly investigated his true identity. Be discovered, creating a political crisis and undermining any findings from his mission. But he had one more critical location to visit: the regional administrative office where citizens applied for government services. It was reportedly a hotbed of corruption where nothing happened without bribes. He needed to see it firsthand. After careful consideration, he decided to risk one more day. The regional administrative office was a study in dysfunction. Hundreds of citizens waited in disorganized lines, many having traveled from remote villages only to be told to return another day. Clerks disappeared for hours at a time. Simple procedures were inexplicably complex. Traoré joined a line to request agricultural assistance, forms a program he had expanded to help farmers affected by climate change. After 4 hours of waiting, he finally reached a bored-looking clerk. Agricultural assistance, that program is finished, the clerk said dismissively, but the government announced it would continue through next year. Traoré insisted. Knowing this for a fact, the clerk leaned forward, lowering his voice. Look, if you really need those forms, it requires special processing. 5,000 CFA. Makes things move faster. That's a bribe, Traoré said, deliberately naive. That's how things work, the clerk replied with a shrug. Your choice, pay or leave. Traoré paid, receiving forms that should have been freely available. As he turned to leave, he noticed a wall displaying his own portrait, the official presidential photograph, mandatory in all government offices. Below it, ironically, hung a framed anti-corruption policy he had instituted. The contrast was stark. On paper, his government championed transparency and citizen service. In practice, those very policies were undermined by the people charged with implementing them. As he exited the building, Traoré nearly collided with a well-dressed man being escorted by differential officials. Minister Ouedraogo, his own Minister of Regional Development. The minister walked through the chaotic office without seeming to notice the dysfunction surrounding him. Escorted to a private room while citizens waited endlessly, Traoré ducked his head and hurried past, but not before overhearing a disturbing exchange. The president still believes the Northern Development Funds are reaching their targets, the minister said to his assistant. Make sure the progress reports show appropriate results. Use the photos from last year's project, if necessary. It was the final piece of the puzzle. The corruption wasn't just at lower levels, it reached his own cabinet. The initiatives failing on the ground were being reported as successes. The reality of Burkina Faso was being systematically concealed from its president. Traoré had seen enough. It was time to return to the palace and act on what he had learned. The transformation back to President Ibrahim Traoré was swift, but the perspective gained during his 6 days as Amadou Ouedraogo would not be so quickly shed. He sat in his office, surrounded once again by the trappings of power, reviewing his notes and the secret recordings he had made. Your findings are disturbing, Mr. President, said Colonel Mensah after Traoré had briefed him and Ouedraogo on everything he had witnessed. Disturbing, but not surprising, Traoré replied. The question is, what we do with this knowledge. He stood and walked to the window, looking out over the capital with new eyes from the presidential palace. Ouagadougou looked orderly, progressive, developing. Now he knew the reality behind that facade. First, immediate action against the specific cases I documented: the construction site safety violations, the bribery at the administrative office, the wage theft. I want those resolved within 48 hours. Ouedraogo nodded, making notes. Second, and more importantly, we need systemic change. The corruption isn't just individuals breaking rules, it's an entire parallel system operating alongside our official one. People don't follow our policies because the unofficial system works better for those with power. What are you proposing, sir? Asked Mensah. Traoré turned from the window, his expression resolute. A complete restructuring of how government services are delivered and monitored. No more reports filtered through layers of officials, direct citizen feedback channels, unannounced inspections by independent auditors, public disclosure of all government spending down to the project level. The ministers will resist, warned especially if what you overheard about ministered is indicative of wider cabinet involvement. Then we replace the ministers, True said simply, and not with more political appointees. I want people who have lived the reality of Burkina Faso, people from Zone 16, from the northern provinces, people who understand what's at stake. He picked up a folder containing profiles of his current cabinet schedule. An emergency cabinet meeting for tomorrow morning, no agenda. I want to see their faces when I walk in, still looking like a Medusa Watto, before revealing who I am and what I've learned. And the northern insurgency, sir? Asked Mensa. Now, I understand it's not just a security problem, it's a governance problem, yes? There are foreign elements exploiting the situation, but they're building on legitimate grievances, Traoré's expression hardened. We've been fighting symptoms while ignoring the disease that ends now. The cabinet meeting the next morning became legendary in Burkina Faso political circles. Ministers arrived to find not President Traoré but an, apparently, homeless man seated at the head of the table, surrounded by security personnel. The confusion turned to shock when the disheveled figure began speaking with the president's voice, detailing specific instances of corruption he had witnessed over the past 6 days. As the implications dawned on them, several ministers attempted to leave, only to find the doors guarded when Traoré removed his disguise elements, one by one, the contact lenses, the fake tattoo, wiping away the makeup that had aged him. The blood drained from Minister Udrago's face. This was not merely an exercise. Traoré told his stunned cabinet this was a necessary step to understand why our policies failed to improve the lives of our citizens. Now, I know the failure begins in this room. By day end, 6 ministers had been removed from office with investigations launched into their activities. In the weeks that followed, Traoré implemented what became known as the Citizens' Eye reforms. Sweeping changes to how government services were delivered and monitored. Administrative offices were required to display clear procedures and pricing for all services, with anonymous reporting channels for bribery attempts. Construction projects included independent safety inspectors with the power to halt work immediately. Labor complaints received expedited processing through newly established mobile courts. Most radically, Traoré instituted a program requiring all government officials, from local administrators to cabinet ministers, to periodically live among the communities they served without security or special treatment. Governance by experience, he called it. In the northern provinces, True personally led a delegation to meet with community leaders, acknowledging the legitimate grievances that had fueled insurgent recruitment. Land seized through corrupt practices was returned. Officials implicated in abuse were publicly tried and sentenced to foreign elements exploiting the situation found their local support evaporating as government responsiveness increased while violence didn't end overnight. Its intensity diminished significantly within months. International observers noted the unusual approach. Some praised Traoré's innovative governance, others questioned the theatricality of his methods. But in the streets and villages of Burkina Faso, a new saying emerged: the president has walked in our shoes, now we walk together. For Ibrahim Traoré, the 6 days he spent as Amadou Ouadogo became the foundation of his leadership philosophy. The presidential portrait that hung in government offices was replaced with a new one, showing Traoré not in military uniform or formal attire, but in the simple clothes of an ordinary citizen, a reminder that leadership begins with understanding. A nation is not governed from palaces, he would often say. In subsequent speeches, it is built in its streets, its fields, its homes. To lead effectively, one must sometimes follow to command. Truly, one must first serve. The experiment that began as a fact-finding mission transformed into a governance revolution that would eventually spread to neighboring countries. But for the citizens of Zone 16, the most immediate change was simpler. When they spoke, their government finally listened.